forward toward the opposing side of the court. So we can see that the torso or his spine is tilted forward quite a bit. Now, I've studied about a dozen, a little more than that, of the top ATP Tour pros, and I've noticed that there's a very common angle that you're going to see over and over again. Most of the pros are somewhere around 38, 39 degrees, somewhere in that ballpark as they're making contact. So if we get right on that line, 38 degrees we're seeing here with Roger. That's a very common position. You're going to see that with all the players. I was actually really surprised at how consistent a lot of the players, the best players, were getting into hitting right around 38 or 39 degrees. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be right on 38, and if you don't, you're not going to serve well. All that means is that's kind of the ideal number you're shooting for. If you're at 41 or 2, you're at 34, not going to make that much of a difference. You're in the ballpark. But this is the reason that we're doing this, and the reason this is so important, and we're seeing this with so many players, isn't a coincidence. It's because he's making a throwing motion here. And the tennis serve, as you've probably heard from some of our other videos, is basically a throwing motion with the racket. He's throwing the racket up toward the ball, and he's throwing that racket up and forward. So by tilting his body forward this way, by getting these shoulders tilted, that's creating a good position to where he can now launch his racket in that way. If his spine was up and down, it would be very difficult for him to get that forward motion and to still have power. But it's not only tennis that we're going to see this in. Sports and sports movement are very common throughout different sports, and many sports have this same motion. Now, these motions that we're seeing in tennis aren't unique to tennis alone. This is just a throwing motion, and very similar to the throwing motion that we would see with a major league pitcher. Here we're looking at Drew Storen, who's a closer for the Washington Nationals, and we're going to see him get into a very similar position at his release point, which would be the same as contact in tennis. Here's the release of the baseball. You can see it's barely sliding out of his fingers here, and now we're going to notice how his body is tilted forward, and that gets him into a position where he can throw with some good speed toward the catcher. So it's very similar to the motion we're making in tennis. We're throwing our racket toward the ball in the sky. He's throwing his ball toward the catcher in front of him, and we can probably even get a very similar reading on the angles of his body. I haven't measured this, but I'm guessing that it's probably pretty close to the 38 or 40 degrees forward that we saw in tennis. So let's see what this gives us here. There we go, 40 degrees. So very, very similar as far as the tilt forward, and you're going to see that in a lot of different sports where you're doing a throwing motion when we're looking for maximum velocity. You also notice that we see the same thing here with someone throwing a javelin. In the javelin throw, the body's tilted forward as he's getting this release to get the maximum amount of strength from his body and deliver it out to the arm. Here we can see the same thing with Milos Raonic in tennis, getting about a 39-degree body angle, and Grigor Dimitrov getting the same thing, 38 degrees. So we're seeing this all throughout tennis, all throughout sports, and this is really going to help you to maximize that power. Okay, so now your lead foot, you're going to put some pressure into the ball of that foot. That's going to have him transfer his hips and his weight a little bit forward and get the momentum going forward. Now later that's going to transfer into upper body momentum and get it tilting forward as we add in this arm movement. But first I want you to pay attention to the lead foot and that left hip and see how that's sliding forward. So as he starts to jump forward, his hip has moved forward a good 8 or 10 inches. So his weight is shifting to the left. That's starting that chain reaction to get the upper body leaning to the left at first. So he's putting some pressure into the ball of his lead foot and letting those hips slide forward. As he starts to jump up now this is where the second piece is going to come in, which is the left arm, the opposing arm. So right now he's going to feel like he's pulling this left arm or this left elbow back toward his left hip or behind his left hip, and that's going to tilt his shoulders downward. So we'll start out right here as he begins the upward motion. Notice how his shoulders are tilted in this direction, almost a little bit back, and his left elbow is nice and high. Now he's going to pull his left elbow downward to get those shoulders tilted forward, and the upper body is going to go right along with it. So now as he comes to contact, the left elbow is fully retracted, and the shoulders have turned significantly forward toward the target. So the shoulders were at this line here, and as that left elbow went down, the spine and upper body tilted forward as his weight went forward, and the shoulders got very, very tilted. So that's where it gets into a powerful position. If we get our shoulders tilted forward like this and our upper body tilted forward, that's putting us in a position where we can throw our arm upward very, very easily. If our shoulders are level and our spine is level, now it's very difficult. It's very tough on the rotator cuff to get that upward throwing motion, and that's why this gets us so much more speed. It's not any kind of trick, it's just simple physics and body movement. If we can get our shoulders very vertical, our spine forward, it's going to be that much easier to really launch this arm and come up and hit that serve with a lot of power. Let's go ahead and watch that one more time, focusing on these two keys. So it really comes down to two basic motions. Number one, putting a little pressure into the ball of the foot as you let your weight slide forward. So that's the first piece, is the weight transfer to the front. Second piece is taking this elbow back down behind your body, behind your hip. That's going to tilt those shoulders forward, and now you're in a great position. Shoulders tilted, spine forward, and you're just going to be able to rip those serves. All right, guys, I hope you really enjoyed this video. As a bonus for you guys, I have a preview of a video from our Power Serve series where we're going to talk about how to throw the racket just like we mentioned here. So I want you to keep these two keys in mind as you're watching this Power Serve video that's about to pop up. And you can click the link that's in the bottom of your screen or down in the description. That's going to take you to a place where
he is the same size as Federer, Murray, and Nadal, but serves much faster because of his efficiency. We will measure the efficiency of Roddic's serve with our special SOMAX analysis system known as RUSSA, or RSSSA, which stands for Range, Sequence, Separation, Speed, and Alignment. In this video, we will concentrate on range, sequence, separation, and speed. First, we will measure range, or how far Andy turns away from the ball during his backswing. As you can see, his hips are rotated away from the ball 123 degrees, his shoulders 123 degrees, and his arm 127 degrees. Range is important in the serve because the more you turn away from the ball, the more time you have to get the parts of your body up to speed prior to impact. By taking speed measurements with a radar gun, we have discovered that you add a mile an hour to your serve for every degree you increase external arm rotation. Andy's maximum external arm rotation prior to impact is 127 degrees, the biggest we have ever measured on tour. Sharapova, by comparison, has only 104 degrees of external arm rotation. Verdich 90 degrees, Murray 89 degrees, Federer 79 degrees, and Nadal 79 degrees. Stage 1 is the legs, Stage 2 the hips, Stage 3 the shoulders, Stage 4 the arm, and Stage 5 the hand. A rocket launch and a serve are most successful if their stages are fired in sequence from the ground up. Roddic does have an efficient sequence. First, he fires his legs by extending them, then he rotates his hips, then his shoulders, then he rotates and extends his arm, and finally he rotates and extends his wrist. During a rocket launch, each stage separates, increasing the speed of the satellite. Roddic has good separation between his stages. As you can see, he extends his legs, stage 1, and then rotates his hips, stage 2, while his racket head is still going back. Then he fires his shoulders, then he extends and rotates his arm, stage 4, and then fires stage 5, his hand. Roddic has excellent separation between stages 4 and 5. Roddic also has the best hip speed on tour during the serve. We estimate hip speed by measuring the number of degrees of rotation prior to impact. As you can see, Roddic rotates his hips a full 123 degrees before impact. He is one of the few players on tour who rotates his hips all the way to the baseline before impact. By contrast, Federer stops his hips 30 degrees short, Verdich 30 degrees, Nadal 45 degrees, Murray 45 degrees, and Sharapova 45 degrees. Hip speed is important in tennis because it takes advantage of the hidden force multiplier built into it. To increase your service speed, increase the strength and speed of your hip rotator muscles with the Power Hip Trainer. To serve over 150 miles an hour efficiently and effortlessly, you need a minimum of 50 degrees of external arm rotation, 24 inches of back extension, and 50 degrees of internal hip rotation. Of all professional athletes, tennis players are the least efficient in the use of their hips. Baseball players, for instance, hit the ball over 450 feet by rotating their hips well before impact. Our golfer here is driving the ball 1,125 feet by rotating his hips 120 degrees prior to impact. To increase the speed and efficiency of your serve, measure and increase your shoulder and hip flexibility, and test and increase the strength of your hips.
olarak kabul edebiliriz.